Thanks for being with us, everybody. We're glad to have you all here today. I'd like to introduce our host for today, Dr. Mac Adkins. Dr. Mac Adkins is the founder and chief academic officer of SmarterServices. Since 2002, he has led the company as it has grown to serve over 5 million students, 12,000 faculty from over 500 educational institutions. And Dr. Adkins, I will pass it over to you now.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate the work that you guys do at Innovative Educators and providing truly meaningful webinars to the academic community. If you're not familiar with what they do, go to their website and check it out. They provide a variety of webinars on almost any topic imaginable that serves us as higher educational leaders, and I encourage you to check out all the webinars that they provide. If you're not familiar with us here at SmarterServices, we are the host of this webinar, and we're glad that you're here today. As I was saying earlier, we're providing this webinar as one of the activities of the National Distance Learning Week that's provided by the U.S. Distance Learning Association. If you weren't aware that it was National Distance Learning Week, well, congratulations, you're here now. So go to the USDLA website. There's several events like this happening this week for us as e-learning professionals, and I encourage you to take opportunity to make yourself available for those. If you're not familiar with us here at SmarterServices, we've been around a long time. For an ed tech company to be 20 years old, that's quite the milestone. And so we're glad to be celebrating that. Over that period of time, we've served over 1,000 institutions, proctored millions of assessments, administered millions of other assessments that we've authored. If you're not familiar with us, there's 3 primary services that we provide. Most of you may know us by our service that's been around the longest, which is the Smarter Measure Learning Readiness Indicator. It's an assessment that quantifies a student's level of readiness for learning in a technology-rich environment. It does that using non-cognitive indicators, so motivation, procrastination, willingness to ask for help, those things that kind of define the learner's personality. So we're in essence measuring grit with that assessment. And if that's something you'd like to provide to your students, let us know. The second solution that we offer is Smarter Proctoring. Rich will be saying a little bit about that and how they use that at FSCJ today in their program. But it is a multimodal proctoring process platform. In addition to providing the 3 common virtual modes that you're familiar with, which is automated virtual proctoring, record and review virtual proctoring, and then face-to-face virtual proctoring. We provide all 3 of those. But in addition to those, we also manage in the same platform face-to-face proctoring. We manage testing centers, both collegiate and professional, proctoring professionals, which can be someone like an HR director at a corporation, as well as instructor as proctor. And then the new thing that evolved out of the pandemic is a new modality called hybrid virtual proctoring, which truly is the best of both worlds, sitting in the middle of virtual proctoring and face-to-face proctoring. And what it does is it allows someone at your institution, it could be the faculty member, could be a testing center employee, could be an e-learning department employee, could be a teaching assistant, whoever that person is, it allows them to be the live virtual proctor. So it's the deterrent level of live virtual proctoring, but at the cost of automated virtual proctoring. So it is the best of both worlds. So we're not here to sell you anything today. We'd love to do that tomorrow, though. So if you'd like to learn about our solutions, just reach out to me, and there'll also be a survey afterwards, and we'd be glad to tell you more about those solutions. So go ahead and advance to the next slide there. And so I'm pleased to introduce to you our resource person for today. Dr. Rich Turner is the Associate Vice President of Academic Operations for Florida State College, Jacksonville. He's been with FSCJ since 2011 and has served in a variety of roles at the director, dean, and executive levels. He holds a doctorate degree from Liberty University in educational leadership. And from our work with him, I can say 100% that he is truly passionate about serving students and fostering academic integrity. So, Dr. Turner, we're glad you're here today. We'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Adkins. Good afternoon, colleagues. So really, just to jump right into this, the pandemic prompted many changes in teaching and learning. One area that experienced tremendous transformation was in the area of proctoring. Hopefully during this webinar, I'll provide reflections on the steps that we at Florida State College at Jacksonville took to maintain proctored testing while ensuring academic integrity, while at the same time serving our students and meeting our students' needs in the midst of a global pandemic. A pandemic that brought about in a very short amount of time the shift of our entire inventory of classes to an online modality. Hopefully during this presentation, I'll also be able to weave recommendations in around key research that we found that provides thoughts and recommendations as we look ahead and consider innovative and new approaches for both on-ground assessment center operations and online proctoring. It is truly a look back while leaning forward. In 1959, John F. Kennedy, then still Senator Kennedy, explained in a speech that when written in Chinese, the word crisis is composed of two characters. One represents danger and the other represents opportunity. Now, much has been written about the precision of Kennedy's understanding of Chinese, and I'm not here to debate that, but everyone acknowledges that every crisis is loaded with danger. It's danger to the continuance of the business. It's danger to the business processes as they currently exist. But then equally at the same time, often in the midst of that crisis, we find great and sometimes amazing opportunities. And so I really want, as we enter into this discussion, to bookend this quote from Kennedy really as my first point, and to really establish one sort of lane for you. And that's, yes, crises happen, but within those crises, there's both danger and then also great excitement. There's opportunity. The second bookend. Peter Drucker said the most reliable way to predict the future is to create it. The other bookend I want to give you this morning, or this afternoon, forgive me, not only the opportunity that lies within a crisis, but this reality that it's the sure way to predict our way ahead is to be involved in creating it today. And so hopefully these two quotes can serve as bookends and really help frame up everything that I would like to say this afternoon. So looking at the agenda, we'll begin with what the research is telling us. And by this, I mean just a few high-level findings around institutional responses to the pandemic. So the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment in October of 2020 produced a fantastic report entitled Assessment During a Crisis, Responding to a Global Pandemic. If you've not reviewed that report, I would encourage you to. It's only like 35 or 40 pages. But in there, they give some high-level findings. And I'm going to grab 4 of those and really they'll be my launching point for what happened at our institution as well. That report really does provide a snapshot of how colleges and universities broadly responded to the global pandemic. And so that'll be my launching point. Next, we'll look back at FSCJ. So there, I really want to look back to how we were testing our online students and how that model rapidly changed and how we were able to execute widespread change in an amazing short amount of time. And then at the same time, I'd like to discuss with you our on-ground assessment center operations, the impact of the global pandemic on them, and how we were able to pivot, completely re-envision, reimagine assessment center services during the height of the pandemic. We'll then go back to research and look at what recommendations are from this research as we review it going forward. And then I'll end the presentation really just some closing thoughts from me. As a guy who's been in this business for a number of years, I was at one time an assessment center manager. So I come with a lot of experience in this area, and I want to provide thoughts around the preferable future and ways that we might navigate to arrive there. So let's start with what the research is telling us as we look back to our response to the global pandemic. And again, this research comes from the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. First, 97% of institutions surveyed made changes to how they assess students during the pandemic. If you're like me, that's probably not shocking at all. What's shocking is that 3% did not. I can only imagine those 3% were completely online with no proctored assessments at all. And so everything just continued on. But 97%, if you want to know the impact on assessment and testing of the global pandemic, it's right there in that first bullet. 97% of institutions surveyed made changes. Secondly, 67 or 66% of respondents made more than one assessment related change. That definitely fit us. As I walk you through how we evolved and changed here at Florida State College at Jacksonville, you will see we're among that roughly 7 in 10 group. But that's interesting as you think about, colleagues, here we are, and more than likely almost 7 in 10 of you, your institution did multiple things around assessment and testing related to the pandemic. Thirdly, 90% of the respondents agreed that the changes were undertaken to address student needs. This is critical and will sort of underpin a lot of the things that we touch upon and we say today. Through all of this, we must keep the student and the student experience at the center of what we're doing. As we're making widespread changes, as we're bringing in whole new policies and procedures, we must ensure that we keep the student at the center of everything we're doing. And then lastly, and I suppose this one did surprise me, only 3% of the respondents stopped assessments altogether. I would have imagined, I would have guessed that it would have been higher than that. And so, colleagues, I think that speaks to the professionalism that exists within our trade, to the professionalism that exists within our faculty, that all these institutions surveyed, again, 787, only 3% stopped assessments altogether. So, colleagues, we were working various ways to continue to proctor our students, ensuring academic integrity. And so that says a lot for our profession. So looking back, now I'll shift the discussion away from research conducted by NELO to really Florida State College at Jacksonville, February 2020. So here we are, the spring term is going. FSCJ has 3,050 college credit sections, classes for the spring term. 2,013 of those sections were on ground, so 66%. 1,037 sections were online, so 34%, or roughly a third of those classes. And duplicated enrollment, 57,381 individual enrollments. Now, to sort of paint the picture so you really get an idea of what goes on here, or what was going on here at Florida State College at Jacksonville, we have a large online population, but most of those students live in Jacksonville, and they're taking an online class as just part of the mix of their class modalities that they're taking. So we have 5 campuses. They're taking one at Kent campus, one at the downtown campus, one online. As you think about these 1,037 online sections, many of these faculty members had proctored exams for these online classes. I'll leave that point there and I'll pick it up as we reflect on what had happened in spring, because that's going to inform what we would have expected to happen spring 2020. So for context, in the spring 2019, we administered 9,989, just call it 10,000 examinations in support of our online classes. So almost 10,000 proctored exams in support of online classes. Again, roughly 1,000 of 3,000. Of those proctored exams, over 8,000, 81% to be 8,085, 81% was an assessment taken on ground in one of our assessment centers. So they were taking an online class, coming and taking the assessment at one of our campuses. And then 1,904 were at a distance, so 19%. And we were using ProctorU, remote site agreements. And again, the student was picking up the cost for those. And so as we're sitting there in, early in the spring 2020, we're expecting something to play out like it did spring 2019. So this does kind of give you an idea of the class inventory. It gives you an idea of modality and breakdown. And again, it gives you an idea that 1/3 of our classes were online, and that represented 10,000 remote proctored exams. Now, some of them were coming on campus, and then again, roughly 20% were doing that remotely. But again, just sort of keep all these numbers in your mind as you think about what was happening at Florida State College at Jacksonville. So that's the online testing component. That's our online students. Well, meanwhile, we have 5 campus-based assessment centers, 2 smaller center-based assessment centers, and 2 Navy-based assessment centers, all fully operational. We provide various placement assessments, PERT, AccuPlacer, NextGen, TABE. We provide a very large number of on-ground assessments through a number of different vendors, CLEP, Dante's, Excelsior, Pearson, Castle, Prove, the list goes on and on. We also provide faculty makeup exams. So as you think back to that list, that roughly little over 2,000 sections that were on ground, those examinations are being covered by their faculty member, and the assessment centers are providing backup in the sense of a faculty makeup examination service. And then for context, in the spring of 2019, again, we're just thinking we're going to do something again similar. We administered just under 15,000 exams in support of on-ground operations. And so as you just kind of bring this together, had the spring 2020 played out normal, we would have expected to give roughly 8,000 on ground in support of our online students, 15,000 in support of our assessment center operations, so 23,000, give or take a little bit, assessments. And that's what we would have expected to happen. That was looking back, that was right there in February where we were. Then the pandemic. In early March, it became apparent to anyone who was paying any attention that although no final decision had been made, we were going to be shifting to a fully online format. We were more than likely going to secure all on-ground operations. So no one had said it, no one had articulated, but in early March, it was crystal clear to me that was what was coming. And so I want you to hold that bullet in your mind about early March, because I'll come back to it in a moment. So as I was facing that reality as the person who oversaw all assessment center operations, on March 23rd, kind of what I was imagining was going to happen did indeed happen. The college, under the leadership of FLDOE, made the decision to shift all classes online. So we went from a little over 1,000 classes with an expected 10,000 assessments online to over 3,000 classes online. Now we should be expecting more like 30,000 assessments in support of those online students. So we went from the 1,037 to 3,050 overnight. The 57,300 duplicated enrollments are now all online classes. As this movie plays forward on April 2nd, so just a little over a week later, the college made the decision to secure all campus-based operations, with the exception of assessment and our library and learning commons, which included tutoring. But already in March, I knew this was all coming. This was just watching the movie play out as it was evident in early March. So although on-ground assessment services remained operational, it was obvious that these services were going to be secured in the very near future. So this included all the testing in support of these online classes, which has now ballooned up to an estimate of 30,000. This included the various assessments offered in our assessment centers. Again, across the spring, that was going to be 15,000. So I'm looking at the reality that for 45,000 exams, give or take a handful, how are we going to administer those exams? What is the next step? And so this was really a real crisis. We had no clear way going forward. Now I'll take you back to early March. In early March, as I began to understand what was occurring, I established a committee. I was the chair, comprised of key stakeholders across the college to review and recommend next steps. So we mapped out possible next steps for online testing and for assessment center operations. We mapped out all the products we were going to consider to take us through those possible next steps. And ultimately, we mapped out final solutions for both of those options, both the online testing in support of our online classes and the testing in support of assessment center on-ground operations. The committee, as you might imagine, started first with the most critical need, and that was those online students who had now all of the inventory is online, and how we're going to handle assessing, testing those students. And then we immediately shifted to covering the on-ground assessments. But the first order of business, those 3,050 online sections, and how we serve those students. Now, keep in mind, up until now, when a student took a remote exam, they paid for that exam. Now we're looking at many more students who are going to be taking these exams if we go with some type of remote option. We're looking at them in the middle of a pandemic when many of these students are already negatively impacted. They've already lost their job. And so I went to the provost as we're mapping solutions and said the final solution has to involve the institution paying for whatever we decide to do. He concurred and we proceeded down that path. So we're shifting already to a model where the student was paying if they wanted the luxury of testing through some type of remote possibility, to the institution is paying for whatever we decide to settle on. So we had used ProctorU. That was one of the services we were using, but the committee had great concerns with the cost for us to now pick up ProctorU, this widespread. And then equally, we recognized that ProctorU's business model was about to be strained by institutions across the planet. And we were very concerned with going with ProctorU for price and really the impact on their business model. And so that really gives you an idea into where we were in early March. So in search of that solution, as you might imagine, the committee was meeting daily, many times, multiple times in a day. And we had numerous meetings and briefings and demonstrations. And just to give you some ideas, we met with reps from HonorLock, Proctorio, ProctorU, Examity, Respondus, SmarterServices, and others. In every case, we met with them multiple times. There were days when we would have one brief from Respondus, another brief from another provider, another brief from another provider. 2 days later, we would have a different inventory we were meeting with. Ultimately, we settled on launching SmarterServices Automated Proctor to cover all of those online classes, including the over 2,000 brand new ones, that 57,381 duplicated enrollments. So let me just give you some reasons why we settled for SmarterServices. We were already using SmarterServices scheduling software within our LMS for students to schedule those appointments. Remember, I told you the online students were scheduling on ground? Well, we were using their scheduling service, their scheduling system to do that within our LMS. And so it was an easy transition. That was one of the reasons. It was very easy for our students. We weren't going to change anything they were experiencing. It was going to be easy to train our faculty and get them up to speed as we transition over to this automated service through them, because we were already using their scheduling service. Number two, we were interested in a service like they had. So Proctorio, HonorLock, and SmarterServices were the three we were really interested in. And SmarterServices, again, the ease of moving into them and the scheduling piece really was attractive to the steering committee. Equally, as we worked with SmarterServices, they were committed to ensuring that they could get all of the third-party testing platforms that our institution was using to work correctly at the point of password entry. That is often a very challenging, and we learned as we worked with them, even like Pearson would have multiple platforms under their banner where the password entry had to be handled completely different by the software. And SmarterServices was completely committed to working through all of those with us to get them to work. And then we believed, at that time, we didn't realize how long this was going to go. And so we recognized that this provided an easy model for us to get back if we wanted to transition back. And then lastly, we had concerns with ProctorU and Examity just because of the business model and the demand that was coming. And so we ultimately settled for SmarterServices. So that initiated, as you might imagine, a rapid deployment. So the decision was made, and we started multiple testing sessions every day, multiple sandbox sessions every day with IT, with SmarterServices, with the assessment center managers. Meanwhile, if you weren't in the sandbox, if you weren't testing, you were developing landing pages with marketing, you were doing informational videos with marketing, you were working on email communications, you were doing training documents for faculty, training documents for students. So meanwhile, we're standing up landing pages with informational videos, with resources, with training documents, all explaining what's coming, how it works, what are the expectations for the faculty, what are the expectations for the students. And on April 3rd, now I want you to picture that, January, February, March, April 3rd, 1 month after this committee started, we deployed SmarterServices automated proctoring. This was only possible because of the crisis. This was the opportunity portion of the crisis. Yes, there was danger all along the way. There was danger for inactivity due to inactivity, and there was danger due to incorrect activity. But this was only possible because of this major disruptor that allowed us to nimbly move in a way that would have otherwise been impossible. And that's where I would sort of just remind you, with every crisis, there is great opportunity. A few months later, we deployed ProctorU Review Plus. That's sort of a tier 2. I'll talk more about that in a moment. It's a hybrid option. So we had a fully automated option, and then we rolled behind that with a hybrid option for testing our online students. And so now we have 2 tiers of options going for our faculty member. It's easy for them to select which one they want to assign to the student within the LMS. So while we're deploying SmarterServices Automated Proctor for testing our online students, we are simultaneously conducting research on the best remote option for on-ground assessment center operations. We reviewed, researched, and tested many options for remote testing, including Microsoft Teams, TeamViewer, Canvas Conference, the big blue button, WebEx, and Zoom. We ultimately settled on Zoom. Now, again, just to give you a little background, all the solutions shared the ability to view the student's desktop, to view the student's camera, to audio chat and chat windows. Most shared the ability for a private testing room, which we believe was critical. But what's caused Zoom to become the solution of choice for us was twofold. Number one, the ability to remote in and take control of a student's desktop without having to download any extension. That was critical because we were going to be required to enter passwords, and we didn't need us to have to download an extension or the student to have to download an extension. And so Zoom was very attractive for that reason. TeamViewer had all the functionality, but we experienced performance issues with TeamViewer when we had more than 4 students in testing. And so ultimately, all of those things together resulted in us launching with Zoom as the solution of choice for remote operations of our what was formerly on-ground assessment center operations. So once we had settled on Zoom, we purchased Zoom accounts for the entire assessment center staff, again, 5 campuses, 2 centers, 2 Navy bases, and spent about 2 weeks testing, developing training documents, developing testing scripts, uploading documents for students, explaining expectations to them, explaining how it worked, redoing our scheduling software, and we launched Zoom in support of remote testing operations for on-ground assessment center operations in place of that on 4/17, exactly about 6 weeks really after that first meeting with the steering committee. Again, extremely rapid testing, review, and implementation and deployment that was only possible because of the pandemic. As you think about now where we were and where we came in a month and in a 6-week period, these were not adjustments to, our business. These were complete paradigm shifts. This was a complete change in how we were doing business, both with our online students and in our assessment center operations. So meanwhile, looking back, continuing to tell the story, beginning in late April, early May, we're still just a few months into this, we commenced working with a few different vendors with the goal of launching a ProctorU-like system that would be utilized by FSCJ assessment staff in support of ground-based assessment center operations. So we knew that Zoom was not the long-term solution. It was good, but it had some limitations. And so we began working with a company, Goverland. They're an IT reachback software company, Proctor 360. They were actually in the midst of developing a very nice solution and exam room. Over an 18-month period, we attended multiple meetings, multiple demonstrations, multiple sandbox sessions, loaded one particular solution on our college-wide servers to test, but we could never get to a solution that we felt met our needs and was ready to replace Zoom. After about 10 months of working with Proctor 360, we launched a pilot with Proctor 360 as the possible long-term solution to replace Zoom. So again, to keep this all in your mind straight, this is our service based on assessment center operations. And this was Proctor 360. The pilot was ran out of Kent Campus Assessment Center. So we actually sliced Kent off. In the scheduling system, students had no idea that they were going to be routed to a totally different software suite. They scheduled their appointment. If it was one being administered at Kent, then all the information they were forwarded just linked them to Proctor 360. So as far as they were concerned, everything seemed normal until they came into the system, and they would be like, they might even notice, hey, this is a little different than the last time. But the system interfaced with Register Blast. It made scheduling easy for our students. And so it was nearly identical experience for them until they got to the moment of testing. So just to give you an idea, so within Proctor 360, I just did a couple of screen grabs. It does a lot of the things that these automated solutions do, but in the intake portion, the student's providing their ID, they're providing their face photo, they're providing their room scan, and meanwhile, the proctor can see it in real time, or he can review it if he happens to be watching the wrong student. So the way we configured it, we brought the students into like an admission room, and it's there we did the ID check, the face photo, the room scan, make them do it again, get it all correct. And then we would release them into the testing room where another proctor was. And again, these aren't real rooms, these are digital rooms. And that's where instructions about their exam were administered, the password was entered, and they commenced taking the exam. To look at the experience once they're in the testing room, the way Proctor 360 was configured was tabs. And so we found running two monitors, you could put two tabs on each monitor, and it was really comfortable to test up to 12 students at a time. You were recording their desktop all the time, you were recording their video feed all the time. You had indications if there was noise in the room, you could chat with the students, you could voice chat with the students. Really, really a very robust system, and one that at least initially we felt met everything we needed to replace Zoom as the next, again, as we're thinking ProctorU-like system in support of on-ground operations. And that brings me now, so that's the whole movie. I'll bring you now to where we are today. So assessment center testing today, after months of piloting, just a few weeks ago, we opted not to move forward with Proctor 360 until a few other items are corrected. It's a very nice platform. There's some fantastic things in it. But before we're ready to completely abandon Zoom, before I'm ready to move from one campus to all my campuses and my centers, a few things that they're working on right now to address. So at this point, we've shifted Kent back out of Proctor 360. All of my campuses are back to using Zoom for remote center operations. But starting in the summer, we came back on campus. So as of right now, we are open Monday through Thursday, 9 to 6, Friday, 9 to 3, with almost the same hour coverage we had before the pandemic ever hit. But now let me give you the next component. We're also open for remote center operations in support of our students. Right now, we're open Monday through Thursday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., Friday through Sunday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. We have never, ever been open 7 days a week in support of assessment center operations, and that's exactly what we are now. So as we have come now to near the tail end of this pandemic, when we entered it, we were testing our students 5 days a week, a little more hour coverage than we have now in our centers. Here we are toward the tail end of this thing. We're testing 7 days a week, and we're testing on ground 5, remote 7. Just so you know, about 30 to 35% of all the assessments I'm giving in my assessment centers in support of on-ground operations are actually provided remotely through Zoom and for a while Proctor 360. So that's assessment center operations today in this new hybrid model. Now let's talk about proctored testing for our online students today and where we are. Currently, faculty can choose in Canvas between the SmarterServices automated proctor. Now, the automated proctor is a fully automated solution. So the ID check, the room scan, the face check, all of that is automated. The faculty would review that. It's AI enhanced, so there's flags that are applied if there's where the software believes this should be reviewed. And then the faculty have to go back and review those flags. And again, it can be anything like the head is out of the frame, an extra head is in the frame, all types of AI flags. Again, a fully automated solution. That's our tier 1 solution. And when faculty assign an exam, they can pick that solution. Tier 2 is our ProctorU Review Plus. This is sort of a high, I don't want to use that word. This is like a semi-automated solution. In the ProctorU Review Plus, a ProctorU proctor does the ID check, the room scan, launches the exam, and then that ProctorU proctor, unbeknownst to the student, backs out of the session. And that entire session continues to be monitored by AI. And unless the student requests assistance, that proctor is not going to go back into that proctoring session. That student's going to complete it all with AI monitoring. The ProctorU proctor is then going to review the flags and review the video in a fast format, an enhanced speed format, and submit a report if he or she finds any misconduct or potential misconduct by the students. And so we now have where the faculty, as they are assigning the exam, they have 2 different tiers. So what we do is obviously the automated proctor is the less expensive tier, no human intervention. The ProctorU Review Plus is a little more expensive. So we explain this to faculty. We're completely transparent with them. We help them understand here's the cost, here's exactly what's happened. This cost is coming out of the institution. And by the way, we're approved to fund these all the way through academic year 21-22. So through spring and summer of 22, we'll be paying for all of these exams for our students as we continue to navigate what's going on with the pandemic. But what we've done is made sure the faculty fully understand how it works, what the cost is to the institution, and they make the best decision for the exam that they're administering. And starting in mid-October, we launched the SmarterServices hybrid virtual proctor. So this is like Proctor 360, the ProctorU solution, except now I'm talking about for our online students. Now I'm talking about a tier 3. So I gave you the tier 1, I gave you the tier 2, here's tier 3. Imagine an honor lock or Proctorio-like service, if you're familiar with those, or SmarterServices automated proctor, if you're familiar with that. But assessment center staff or faculty monitor the students along with AI. So what you have now is you have your own professional proctors or your faculty monitoring these exams along with AI. So they're monitoring the assessment. They can replay the video. This is the tier 3 solution. This is the ProctorU solution, except ProctorU is your faculty member or your professional assessment staff. As you might imagine, this is where I've always been driving. This is where I've been driving for the last 18 months, both in our assessment centers and in our online classes. I'm super excited about this pilot and really believe this will become tier 3, and I'll talk about that in a moment, of our online options for testing our online students. So imagine faculty will now have 3 tiered options. And again, we're doing a pilot now, so all faculty don't have the option. But imagine they can take the automated proctor, the lowest cost. They can take ProctorU Review Plus, the expense, or they can take the one that's now tied to my assessment center staff hours of operation. It's a greater cost, but we explain all this to them. And then equally, I would just say in passing, there is a possibility as I've continued to work with Jason at SmarterServices that this solution might one day day be deployed outside of campus, might one day be another option for assessment center operations, and one that I would be putting right next to Proctor 360 as a potential possible solution and replacement for Zoom and assessment center operations remotely going forward. So that helps you understand where we are both with remote testing and online testing. So this is really just to give you an idea of the solution. Everything's scalable. So in the SmarterServices hybrid Proctor, if you've got one student in there, you can blow up their desktop, you can blow up their camera, you have indicators if there's noise in the room, you have a chat window, you can audio chat with the student. Even as you bring multiple students in, you control the sizes of all the windows. And again, this is all being recorded. And then even as you continue to bring additional ones in, you can focus in on one student, you can have a chat with that student while still having other students in smaller windows. Again, a very robust, scalable solution. And we found 10 to 12 students looks like is going to be achievable. So more to follow on that, but we are at a very exciting place with the SmarterServices hybrid Proctor. So online testing today, I gave you the tier 1 fully automated, tier 2 Proctor U Review Plus semi-automated, tier 3 the pilot that's going on. That's now that again, now you're talking your faculty member or your assessment center staff monitoring your students. They're watching the assessment. That is tier 3. And then I would add, we also offer as a backup the ability to test our students using Zoom anytime they run into any issue with the technology. We don't have a lot of this, but if there's a problem with bandwidth, if there's concerns that there's a problem, we generally bring them straight over and test them remotely from our assessment center using Zoom. And so again, that's online student testing today, including that caveat with the current pilot with SmarterServices. So that's where we are, that's where we came from. And now let's talk about research and recommendations as you broadly start to look at the research as it involves going forward. So some key recommendations. Number 1, ensure flexibility in assessments. Now, of course, this brings with it the idea of alternative assessments, but let's set that aside for a minute. I'll talk about that separately. This is much more than that. We're talking about the timing windows of administration. We're talking about the methods of administration. We're talking about flexibility in scoring. We're talking about other things that you should consider in ensuring flexibility in your assessments. Avoiding further harm. We all get that, right? The students have been through a lot. Don't do anything that's going to further harm our students. Remember to empathize with the students. Again, we get that. We're in the midst of this with them. We need to ensure that we're carrying them along and we're empathizing. Assure assessments have a clear purpose. Assessment strategy must align with organizational strategy. Do not require a higher level proof of learning for online than you would for traditional face-to-face. Again, as you look at the research, it seems sometimes some faculty who are not familiar with teaching online kind of have this idea that, well, I need to make it tougher because it's online. And again, the researchers say, no, modality doesn't dictate proof of learning. Proof of learning is proof of learning, not based on modality. And then an area that we've done a lot of work here at this institution as we've worked with faculty during the pandemic, consider alternative methods. And by alternative method, I mean a method of evaluation where we measure the student's level of proficiency in the subject as opposed to the student's level of knowledge. Now that's a nuance, but I think you get it. The overall goal of that alternative assessment is to allow students to demonstrate their knowledge and sometimes to do it through executing tasks. So all types of things now come into the mix. Portfolios and e-portfolios, performance tests, open book or even open assessments, timed exams that are open but with the time limitation, crib sheets or note exams that are timed, collaborative testing, where that testing empowers the students to work together, to brainstorm together, summarizing materials, maybe it's reading, lecture, class discussions, reports, interviews, concept maps, fact sheets, all these other alternative assessments. In fact, our institution put together a professional development training course for faculty to dive into just the depth of alternative measures in assessing. Ensure you consider and address inequities. So as you roll out these things, think about broadband and how we're going to ensure our students have broadband. We expanded our broadband coverage at all of our campuses to include everything on the campus, including the parking lot. We had a camera giveaway program, a laptop giveaway program, a laptop lending library, a camera lending library. You need to ensure you do everything to ensure that these steps don't increase the gaps in equity. Utilize low bandwidth options where possible. Again, that's not only an exam, but I would go back to have solutions that in an emergency or in a rare condition like Zoom, you can go to those options that can handle low bandwidth issues better. Ensure so faculty support and training is developed to support changes. This is critical. We were running 1,000 miles an hour, but it was critical that we have faculty right alongside us as we're explaining all of these options, as we're explaining how they work, as we're explaining what they're going to need to do, as we're showing them the student experience. It is critical that you ensure faculty fully understand what you're doing and what it's going to look like and how it works and how it impacts them. Equally, ensure student support and training is developed to support these changes. These changes were coming fast, but you've got to be creating quick informational videos for students. You've got to show them what the expected experience is going to look like. They have to understand how they're going to click through and what they're going to select. But then equally, you've got to explain to them clearly in these new services their expected behavior. What is expected and what is not allowed. What will be considered misconduct. And so it's critical to create documents that outline these things for the students. And then lastly, I would say, almost where I begin, we need to continually plan for the future. We need to continually think about the future. So leaning forward, assessment leadership needs to ensure that their institutions are engaged in the discussion around alternative assessments. Again, you will find faculty will gravitate towards some of this. Many times they're doing a proctored assessment because that's what they took when they were in class. That's what they were shown. They've never been shown some of these robust alternative assessments that could be used. Assessment needs to be leading the way in training and educating faculty with the various benefits and limitations with testing technologies deployed at your college. Again, critical. Assessment needs to be leading the way in ensuring robust and meaningful training materials for our students around these testing platforms and testing protocols. Again, we talked about it, absolutely critical. Colleges need to consider offering various options for remote proctoring online students, from fully automated all the way to human proctored with AI assistance. I would argue if we're going to give proctored exams to online students, we need to give the faculty a quiver of arrows to choose from. Assessment centers need to consider offering on-ground and remote testing options in support of our students. We're doing it right now. Where I say I envision a smaller on-ground footprint but extended hours, that's exactly what we're doing. I meet with my managers every 2 weeks and we review traffic flow in all of our centers and online, ensuring that we are meeting the students where they need to be met. By the way, we're doing it with the same budget we had prior to the pandemic. Colleges need to consider securing a robust ProctorU-like service that is operated by that college or university in support of both online and on-ground testing. And then I'll end here. My closing point, we must continue to reimagine and plan for the future. I'll start where I ended, or I'll end where I started. The most reliable way to predict the future is to create it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. I really appreciate you sharing the story there of what you guys all endured at FSCJ, and I'm sure everyone was shaking their heads saying, yep, that's very parallel to what happened at my institution, and thank you for sharing what you guys are currently doing and where you're going in the future. So we've got 7 or 8 questions that were submitted in the chat, and to keep you from having to read those, I'll pose those to you in the order in which they came in. First of all, Lori asked for clarification. You were giving numbers as far as your course count, but what is the enrollment there spring 2019 at FSCJ?
Yeah, so the duplicated enrollment was the 57,000.
Okay. All right,
So
great.
just north of 57,000, that was the duplicated class enrollment.
Okay. Lance asked for clarification about your use of Proctor 360. You said is it used by the institution's proctor, not a vendor proctor. Is that correct?
He is absolutely correct. So like you, Proctor 360 has multiple solutions. We were using the solution where we were logging into the back end and proctoring our students.
Okay.
So they have other solutions, but that's how we were using the solution.
Alan asked, was there a difference between what proctoring options were used by math or other quantitative intense courses versus what other faculty did?
So I'll assume that's in reference to our online classes. And again, the answer is no. We initially launched with the automated proctor, so SmarterServices automated proctor. We expanded to ProctorU Review Plus. And then now in the pilot, we've expanded and added potentially another long-term expansion in SmarterServices Hybrid Proctor. And then we have the emergency capability to test students via Zoom.
Okay.
And the faculty, though, to make sure we're clear, the faculty choose at the point of the exam which solution that student has to use to take that exam. So the student doesn't get the choice. The faculty member assigns it to that service, and that's the service that it's provided to the student. I hope that makes sense.
And I would think factors that the faculty members taking into consideration are everything from the rigor of the exam, or is this an ADA, accommodation being made for the student, things like that, correct?
You're absolutely right, Mac. And that's where I said we met with the faculty and really helped them understand the differences and the cost to the institution, when they would use one, when they would not use one, so that they were able to make the most informed decision at the point of assigning the exam.
Okay. Michael asked for clarification about hybrid virtual proctoring. He said, in that modality, do students in a class take the exam synchronously?
So great question. The limitation is obviously the number of students who can test at the same time. But if you have multiple proctors, let's say you have 3 proctors and you have a 25-person class, then you can easily test all of those students at the same time. Now you're going to need 3, you're going to, again, what we found, and Mac may have better numbers, but 10 to 12 right now is what we're thinking is a good number, at least early on for the hybrid proctor. So one proctor can handle about 10 to 12 students, is what we're finding, or what we think is we're early on in this.
Yeah,
so hopefully that answered the question. So yes, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, about 10 is optimal. And what we're able to do through our scheduling system for this platform is control that room size. So if you as an institution feel like 10 is optimal, or maybe you think 5 is optimal, or maybe you want to go with a larger number, we can set that room size so that registrations for that room are capped at that number that you're in control of.
Yeah, and again, it's a great point, and what limits it too is the number of proctors you have serving at the time.
True. Kristen asked for clarification about paper and pencil exams that were proctored virtually. For instance, a math or science exam that the student has to be able to physically write on.
We secured all paper-based exams. Remember when I told you a crisis can create great opportunity? We had a massive number of paper-based exams that were administered in the old model. Remember those 10,000 exams that I told you about, that 8,000 of them students were coming on campus? A large number of those were paper-based exams. So imagine they were packing these exams, they were inventorying these exams, they were taking these exams to different rooms, they were recollecting these exams, they were repackaging and sending these exams back. And one of the things we did is secured and went all digital.
One of the good features of the Smarter Proctoring platform is that we have a workflow for handling paper and pencil exams, and my colleague Carol Moody is here, and she may want to chime in and explain this better than I can. But we actually have a process that involves like a QR code that's associated with what the student prints out, that is the paper-based part of it. And so when that QR code then is scanned and submitted back up, that's what connects that piece of paper to that student's assessment, so that when the faculty member goes into the web-based interface, right there in the LMS, the Smarter Proctoring interface, they then see that paper and they're confident that that paper was, attached to that exam for that student. Carol, do you want to add anything for clarification there?
Yeah, the paper right now, the paper pencil features are in there to really facilitate the delivery of a paper pencil exam from a faculty to a face-to-face proctor for the faculty member. For the face-to-face proctor to deliver, and then to be able to upload it directly back for the faculty member. So it's a great way to secure your exams. No putting exams in envelopes and them traveling back and forth across campus. I had one testing center tell me, "Oh, we use pink envelopes. It is super secure." And to me, that's just like signaling to every student worker on campus that a pink envelope has got somebody's exam in it. You may want to take a look.
Sheila asked for courses that involve skills testing, like nursing or medical courses. What's your assessment strategy there?
So again, we as assessment center professionals, and me as the AVP that oversees this area, again, all we did was facilitate the training provided out of our professional development area. This is really a faculty-driven decision at our institution. I know it really took root in the medical area and the IT area. A lot of stuff happened in the IT area as we started having this discussion about alternative assessments. Again, our goal was just to facilitate the discussion.
Okay. Nancy asked that for a school of your size and the scope that you're doing, you must have a lot of students that need accommodations due to disabilities. So what was your workflow? How did you handle taking care of those accommodations for students with disabilities and medical conditions?
Yeah, great question. So we use Simplicity interfaces with Register Blast, so it's clear anytime a student has an accommodation, it's entered in our system. Obviously, if the faculty member if we're talking about an online class, then the faculty member is the one who's assigning that extra time or whatever that special accommodation is. But absolutely, it's happening both online for online students, and it's happening for on-ground assessment operations as well as remote. And the software suite that we use to connect all that together is Simplicity.
Okay.
If you're familiar with that suite.
Yeah, that's great that you're using Simplicity to track that and make sure that it is indeed a verified accommodation that needs to be made. And what our platform, Smarter Proctoring, adds on top of that is if you're a faculty member, there's a student who has a verified need for an accommodation, what you can do using Smarter Proctoring is basically you configure an exam that's individual, that's specific to that student. So based on their accommodation, if they need extended time, if for some other reason they're using a technology, a screen reader or something that needs to open a second browser window, you can configure, in fact, everything that can be configured for the whole class for a normal exam. You've got all those options that you can configure for that student that needs that accommodation. And so only that one student has that differently configured exam. Reggie asked about Chromebook accessibility with the programs that you're using, Rich.
So and Mac, you would have to answer, but I believe for SmarterServices, they do accept the newer Chromebooks, but I'll let you weigh in on that.
And Carol, you can.
Yes, Chromebook. Yeah, we are Chromebook compatible, and something else that we did during the pandemic as well is that we didn't always just require the newest version of Chrome. Sometimes we can go a few versions back to help students that may have older Chromebooks or Chromebooks that the institution formatted and they can't update. So we try to be as Chromebook friendly as we can. We know a lot of the CARES funds were used at institutions to put Chromebooks out there for students.
Laurel asked an interesting question. As you're moving into a hybrid model where some of your school personnel, your testing center staff, your faculty members, and perhaps others are acting as the proctor, what are your requirements? What are your training for these people as they're functioning as a proctor?
So right now, everyone who's proctoring for Florida State College of Jacksonville is a professional proctor. They're a trained proctor who go through all of our training to work in assessment certification. We have no example where someone is proctoring an exam who is not a Florida State College of Jacksonville proctor right now. Now, as you know, Mac, and I talked about it, there is the possibility for faculty to proctor exams in these platforms, but they would need to be trained on how the platform works, how to move within the platform, all those particular things. So what I have, to answer the question very direct, is all my folks are trained assessment center staff, and then we train them in these software platforms. So even when we launched Zoom, and I talked about how quick we did that, we made a lot of training documents. We really worked through the system to figure out how things work and when to put a person in a private testing room, and when you can leave them in a public room together. And so those are things you all have to puzzle through with all these different software suites so that you fully understand. So that means you've got your staff pretending to be a student, and you've got some of your staff being the proctor, so that you can figure out how they can move around and how to prevent that moving around. So you can figure out how these systems work.
Okay, great. We are at the top of the hour, so if you have another commitment, thank you for joining us today. We do have 2 additional questions I'm going to ask Dr. Turner to speak to. You may want to stick around and hear those. If not, if you do need to drop off, you will receive a post-webinar email that will have a link to a survey. Tell us how we did. Was this webinar what you thought it would be? How can we improve future webinars? And if we can reach out and give you more information, we'd love to do that. So if you can stick around for these 2 questions, here they are. Kamala asked, as you were evaluating different options, what about data security? What did you learn there?
So data security has been one of our ongoing concerns. Especially as we talk about using things like Zoom and TeamViewer and all of these solutions. In fact, when we first started, and we came to the solution that Zoom was what we wanted to go with, our CIO said no. So we had to really work with our CIO and the institution, because our CIO is like, I don't trust Zoom, it's not happening. But again, we continued to build the case. But as you work with these companies, you really do need to work with how these feeds are being secured. And if recordings are happening, how those recordings are being secured and stored.
And feedback that we're receiving from several schools that are looking at the hybrid virtual proctoring modality is that as their faculty have tried to use Zoom, it's not as much data security as it can be FERPA compliance. Because when you're doing Zoom, you've got a group of people and you've got one person that looks like they're cheating, you've got 20 other people that are not. When you bring that recording into that conference with your academic integrity committee, you're getting the video of all 20. And that's not really FERPA compliant when these persons really aren't being questioned. And so what we're able to do with that hybrid virtual proctoring is zoom in, no pun intended, on that video of the one student for which academic integrity violations are suspected. So it is certainly more FERPA compliant. And the last question from Ryan is, how do you handle technical challenges that students may have, power outages, low bandwidth, and such?
Yeah, we work with the students. As you might imagine, those things happen in every one of these solutions. And again, we just work with the students. I told you in cases where they're having bandwidth issues with some of these Proctor 360, or they're having problems with SmarterServices in the online component, we get them into Zoom. It seems to be the one that really has, I guess, the broadest tolerance with bandwidth issues. But ultimately, sometimes it requires a delay. Sometimes it requires the student to go to another computer. But we continue to work with the student. We might have to reach back out to the faculty to reset the exam for administration. A lot of different things can happen. But the assessment center staff and SmarterServices work directly with that student as they run and encounter those problems.
Yeah, what we've seen is that certainly while unexpected things may happen at the last minute, most of those can be avoided when the student tests their system prior to their first proctored exam, just to make sure they've got plenty of bandwidth. But as Rich was saying, sometimes there are students who just don't have a home or other environment that's got appropriate bandwidth, and they need to go somewhere. And that's one of the great things about smarter proctoring as a multimodal proctoring platform is we're not just providing virtual proctoring. If there's a student that for technical reasons, or maybe there's some sort of accommodation that there's assistive devices in the testing center that they have that they don't have access to in other environments, if they need to test in that physical environment, the same interface for scheduling all those modalities is what the student uses. So they don't have to follow one workflow for one modality and a totally separate workflow for another modality. So thank you all for your time. Especially thank you to the 57 of you that stayed for the extra 3 minutes of bonus questions. We're glad you're here, but that's really just indicative of the fact that as educators, we're really wanting to learn about good practices from others. So thank you, Dr. Turner, for all the information you shared with us today, and you guys have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Atkins. Thank you, colleagues.